Dust swirled through the weathered streets of Copper Springs, carried by the relentless desert wind that seemed to strip away hope along with moisture. Eleanor Ellie Matthews knelt by the creek that ran behind the town, her hands raw and red from scrubbing the endless pile of laundry that kept her barely alive. The women of the town whispered as they passed, their voices carrying on the heated air like rattlesnakes' warnings. "There goes the cursed one," Martha Henderson muttered to her companion, though not quietly enough. Poor Jacob would still be alive if he'd married a proper woman who could give him sons. Ellie's grip tightened on the washboard, her knuckles white against the worn wood. 3 years had passed since the mine collapse that took Jacob, and still the town blamed her barren womb for his death. Her blue-grey eyes, once bright with hope, now held the weary acceptance of someone who'd learned to expect nothing from the world. As she wrung out another shirt, the sound of spurs jingling on the wooden boardwalk caught her attention. Samuel Carter, the substitute sheriff, was making his rounds. Even from a distance, she could see the rigid way he held himself, the constant vigilance in his green eyes that never quite left the horizon. The scar that ran from his forehead to his right temple caught the light, a permanent reminder of battles fought in lands far from this desert town. Sam paused at the edge of the creek, ostensibly checking on the town's boundaries, but Ellie noticed how his gaze lingered on her small, weathered hands as she worked. Unlike the others, there was no judgment in his eyes, only a recognition that she couldn't quite place. "Ma'am," he tipped his brown leather hat slightly, his voice rough from disuse. "Sheriff Carter," she replied, not looking up from her washing. She'd learned that drawing attention only brought more whispers, more sidelong glances from the townsfolk who'd decided her fate long ago. Ellie. The way he said her name was different, not with the cold formality others used, but with something that sounded almost like understanding. "Might I suggest you finish up soon? Big Jim's been drinking since noon, and when he drinks, he likes to remind folks about their obligations to the community." Her stomach clenched. Jim O'Malley owned the mine and half the businesses in town. When Jacob died in the cave-in, Jim had made it clear that Ellie's presence was a reminder of failure. His failure to keep his workers safe, and her failure to give Jacob a reason to be more careful. "Thank you for the warning," she said quietly, finally meeting his eyes. Up close, she could see the exhaustion that lived there, the kind that sleep never touched. Sam nodded and turned to go, but something in her expression made him pause. "Ellie, you know the old Cartwright place, the one on the hill overlooking the valley?" She nodded. Everyone knew about the abandoned homestead where a family had tried to make it work before the harsh desert claimed their dreams. "Well, still good up there, private, peaceful." He adjusted his hat, suddenly looking younger, despite the premature grey threading through his dark hair. "Sometimes a person needs a place to think without interruption." Before she could respond, he was walking away, his boots raising small clouds of dust with each step. But for the first time in months, Ellie felt something other than resignation stirring in her chest. Perhaps it was hope, perhaps it was simply the rare gift of kindness from another lost soul. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and copper, Ellie finished her washing and made her way to her small cabin on the outskirts of town. The walls were thin, and she could hear the sounds of family dinners, children's laughter, and normal lives being lived just out of her reach. She lit her oil lamp and settled down to her evening mending, trying to ignore the way her small silver wedding locket caught the light. Through her single window, she could see the lights of Copper Springs twinkling below, a community that had no place for a woman like her. But tomorrow, she decided, she might just take a walk up to that old homestead. Not because Sheriff Carter had suggested it, but because sometimes even outcasts deserved a place to breathe freely under the vast Arizona sky. The next evening found Ellie climbing the rocky path to the Cartwright place, her worn boots slipping slightly on the loose stones. She told herself she was just curious about the old homestead, but deep down she knew she was hoping to find something, or someone, who might understand the weight of carrying other people's judgments. The abandoned house sat like a weathered sentinel against the darkening sky, its wooden walls silvered by years of desert sun and wind. The well Sam had mentioned stood nearby, its wooden bucket hanging by a frayed rope. But what caught Ellie's attention was the figure sitting on the front steps, hat pulled low, watching the sun paint the valley below in shades of amber and rose. "Sheriff Carter," she said softly, not wanting to startle him. Sam looked up, and for a moment his carefully guarded expression slipped. "I was hoping you might come," he admitted, then seemed surprised by his own honesty. "I mean, it's a good view of the town from up here. Good for observation." Ellie smiled, the first real smile she'd felt in weeks. "Is that what you call it? Observation?" "Among other things." He gestured to the step beside him. "Would you, that is, if you'd like to sit a spell?" She settled beside him, careful to maintain a proper distance, though she was acutely aware of the warmth radiating from his body in the cooling desert air. Below them, Copper Springs looked almost peaceful, its harsh edges softened by distance and the golden hour light. "You fought in the Indian Wars," Ellie said quietly. It wasn't a question. Everyone in town knew Sam's story, or at least the parts he'd been willing to share. 2 years with the 7th Cavalry, he confirmed, his fingers unconsciously tracing the scar on his forehead. "Came back to find my fiancée had married the bank president's son. Seems a man with scars and difficulties. Wasn't quite what she'd been hoping for in a husband." "Difficulties?" Sam was quiet for so long that Ellie thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Some nights, I wake up thinking I'm still out there. Sometimes I can't tell if the sounds I'm hearing are real or just echoes. The doc back east called it soldier's heart." Ellie nodded slowly. She understood about carrying invisible wounds, about being judged for things beyond your control. "Jacob and I tried for 5 years to have children," she said, surprising herself with the admission. 3 miscarriages and then nothing. The town decided it was God's punishment for some sin I must have committed. When he died in the mine, they said it was because I'd made him reckless, desperate to provide for sons he'd never have. "That's not—" Sam started, then caught himself. "I'm sorry. That's not your burden to carry. Isn't it?" Ellie picked up a small stone and turned it over in her palm. "Some days, I almost believe them. Maybe if I'd been different, better somehow." "No." The firmness in Sam's voice made her look at him. "Ellie, you listen to me. I've seen real evil in this world, men who kill for pleasure, who hurt the innocent for sport. You're not that. You're not cursed or broken or any of the things they say." "Then what am I?" Sam studied her face in the dying light, taking in the determined set of her jaw, the compassion that still lived in her eyes despite everything she'd endured. "You're someone who keeps going when everything tells her to quit. Someone who shows kindness to a scarred-up old soldier, even though it might bring her more trouble with the town gossips." A coyote called from somewhere in the darkness, and Sam automatically tensed, his hand moving instinctively toward his gun. Ellie noticed the movement and, without thinking, placed her hand gently on his arm. "It's all right," she said softly. "We're safe here." The simple touch, the calm certainty in her voice, seemed to anchor him. Sam looked down at her small hand on his forearm and felt something he'd thought the war had killed in him: peace. "Ellie," he said, his voice rough with emotion he'd kept buried for too long. "I know this town has no place for either of us. I know we're both carrying more than our share of ghosts, but sitting here with you, it's the first time since I came back that I feel like maybe I could belong somewhere again." She looked up at him, seeing past the scars and the shadows to the good man beneath. "The Reverend preaches about finding your place in God's plan," she said quietly. "But maybe home isn't a place at all. Maybe it's just finding someone who sees you for who you really are, not who you failed to be." As the first stars began to appear in the vast Arizona sky, two lonely souls sat together on the steps of an abandoned dream, discovering that sometimes the most unexpected places become home when you find someone who truly understands your heart. "You belong with me," Sam said suddenly, the words escaping before he could stop them. "I mean, if you'd want that, if you'd have a broken-down soldier who still jumps at shadows." Ellie turned to face him fully, her blue-grey eyes reflecting the starlight. "Only if you'd have a widow the whole town thinks is cursed." "I'd have you," he said without hesitation, "scars and all." "Then yes," she whispered, "yes, I belong with you too." 3 months later, the old Cartwright place had been transformed. Sam had repaired the roof and reinforced the walls, while Ellie had planted a small garden and hung curtains in the windows. What had once been a testament to failed dreams had become a sanctuary for two souls who'd found their home in each other. But happiness, they'd learned, came with a price in a town like Copper Springs. "It's not right," Big Jim O'Malley declared from his seat at the Copper Springs saloon, his voice carrying the authority of a man who owned half the town. "A woman like that, taking advantage of a war hero who ain't right in the head." Reverend Blake shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Perhaps we should consider..." "Consider what?" Jim slammed his whiskey glass down. "That woman couldn't give her own husband sons, and now she's got her hooks in our sheriff. Mark my words, she'll be the death of him too." The saloon fell silent as Sam pushed through the swinging doors, his sheriff's badge catching the lamplight. His green eyes swept the room, taking in the guilty faces and averted gazes. "Gentlemen," he said coolly, his hand resting casually on his gun belt. "I couldn't help but overhear my name being mentioned." Big Jim stood, his considerable bulk making the floorboards creak. "Sam, we're just concerned about you. That woman..." "My wife," Sam corrected, his voice carrying the quiet authority of a man who'd faced down Apache war parties. "Her name is Eleanor Carter, and she's my wife." A murmur ran through the gathered men. Sam and Ellie had been married by the circuit judge just the week before, but the news was still spreading through the gossip channels of the small town. "Now, Sam," Reverend Blake stepped forward, his hands raised in a peaceful gesture. "We all want what's best for you, but surely you can see how the community might be concerned about your association with a woman who works harder than any 3 people in this town, who's never said an unkind word about anyone despite how she's been treated." Sam's voice remained level, but there was steel beneath the calm. "Reverend, I've seen real wickedness in this world. I've watched good men die screaming while cowards live to see another day. And I'm here to tell you that Eleanor Carter has more goodness in her little finger than most folks have in their whole bodies." "That's all well and good," Big Jim interjected, "but the fact remains..." "The fact," Sam interrupted, "is that I'm a grown man who's served his country and earned the right to choose his own wife. And I choose Eleanor. I choose her every day, every moment from now until the day I die." The silence that followed was broken by a new voice from the doorway. "And I choose him." Everyone turned to see Ellie standing in the entrance, her chin raised defiantly, despite the sea of hostile faces. She wore her best dress, a simple blue cotton that brought out her eyes, and her wedding ring gleamed on her finger. "Ellie." Sam moved toward her, concern etched on his face. "You don't need to..." "Yes, I do." She stepped into the room, her boots clicking on the wooden floor. "For too long, I've let this town's opinion define who I am, but I'm not the woman you think I am, Big Jim. I'm not cursed or broken or dangerous." She looked around the room, meeting each man's gaze directly. "I'm a woman who loved her first husband with everything she had, and who loves her second husband the same way. I'm someone who works hard, pays her debts, and minds her own business. And if that threatens you somehow, maybe the problem isn't with me." Dr. Thompson, who'd been silent in the corner, suddenly stood. "She's right," he said quietly. "I've known Eleanor, both as Mrs. Matthews and now as Mrs. Carter, for 3 years. I've never known a more decent, hard-working woman. And Sam," he looked directly at the sheriff, "I've treated you for your service injuries, and I can tell you that being with Eleanor has done more for your healing than any medicine I could prescribe." "That's enough!" Big Jim's face was red with anger. "I won't stand here and—" "Then don't stand here," Sam said simply. "The door's right behind you." For a moment it seemed like the tension might explode into violence. Then Martha Henderson pushed through the crowd, her face set with determination. "James O'Malley," she said, using Big Jim's full name like his mother might have, "you ought to be ashamed of yourself. This girl, and she is barely more than a girl, has done nothing but try to survive in a world that's been cruel to her from the start. And Sam Carter is a hero who deserves happiness wherever he can find it." She turned to address the room. "Most of you men have wives at home who've been talking about this very subject. And I can tell you that every decent woman in this town thinks it's high time Sam and Eleanor found some happiness together." A murmur of agreement rippled through some of the men, and Big Jim found his support crumbling around him. Sam took Ellie's hand, intertwining their fingers. "We're not asking for your approval," he said calmly. "We're just asking to be left in peace. Eleanor and I have found something worth fighting for, and we intend to protect it. Together," Ellie added, squeezing his hand. As they turned to leave, Reverend Blake called out, "Sam, Eleanor, for what it's worth, I think perhaps God brings people together in ways we don't always understand. Maybe there's more to his plan than we can see from down here." Sam nodded curtly, but Ellie turned back with a gentle smile. "Thank you, Reverend. That means more than you know." As they walked out into the star-filled Arizona night, Sam pulled Ellie close. "You didn't have to do that," he murmured into her hair. "Yes, I did," she replied, leaning into his strength. "For too long, I let fear make my choices for me. But I'm not afraid anymore, Sam. Not when I'm with you." They walked up the hill toward their home, toward the place where 2 broken souls had learned to be whole again. Behind them, the lights of Copper Springs twinkled in the darkness, but ahead lay something better, a future built on love, acceptance, and the radical notion that sometimes the heart knows better than the world what it needs to survive. "You belong with me," Sam said softly, echoing the words that had started it all. "Always," Ellie whispered back. "Always and forever." Hakeem. And in the vast Arizona desert, under a canopy of endless stars, 2 outcasts had finally found their home, not in a place, but in each other's hearts, where they would always truly belong. 6 months after their confrontation at the saloon, Sam and Ellie had settled into a rhythm of quiet contentment at the old Cartwright place. The harsh Arizona winter had given way to spring, and Ellie's garden was beginning to show the first green shoots of promise. But it was another kind of seed that would soon change everything. Dr. Thompson's knock came just after dawn, urgent and insistent. Sam answered the door, immediately alert. In Copper Springs, early morning visits from the doctor usually meant trouble. "Sam, I need you and Eleanor to come to town immediately," Dr. Thompson said, his usual calm demeanor strained with urgency. "There's been an accident at the mine." The ride into town was a blur of dust and worry. As they approached Copper Springs, they could see a crowd gathered around the mine entrance, women clutching shawls and children pressed close to their mothers' skirts. The sound of men shouting orders and the creak of pulleys filled the air. "Cave in," Dr. Thompson explained as they dismounted. 3 men trapped. We've got them out, but—" He paused, looking directly at Ellie. "One of them is just a boy. 16 years old, Billy Morrison. His family, they don't have much. And his injuries. Ellie's heart clenched. She knew the Morrison family, Irish immigrants who'd come west with nothing but hope and strong backs. Billy was their eldest, the one they counted on to help support his younger siblings. "What do you need from us, Doc?" Sam asked, though his eyes were on Ellie, reading the determination already forming in her expression. "The boy needs constant care. Around-the-clock nursing for at least 2 weeks, maybe more. His back is injured, not broken, thank God, but badly strained. Without proper care," Dr. Thompson shrugged helplessly, "his mother's got 4 little ones to tend to, and his father's got to keep working to feed them. They can't afford to hire help." "He can stay with us," Ellie said immediately, "at the homestead. It's quiet there, peaceful, good for healing." Sam nodded his agreement, but Dr. Thompson looked uncertain. "Eleanor, you know how people talk. A young man staying in your home, even with Sam there, and the boy's Catholic. His family might not be comfortable." "Then we'll ask them," Ellie said firmly. "But I won't let a child suffer because of small-minded gossip." An hour later, they found themselves in the Morrisons' cramped 2-room cabin. Mary Morrison, a worn woman who looked older than her 35 years, held her youngest, a baby barely walking, while 3 other children clung to her skirts. Her husband Patrick sat beside Billy's makeshift bed, his face grey with worry and exhaustion. "Mrs. Carter." Mary Morrison's voice was stiff with the formality of someone who'd learned to be careful around her social betters. "The doctor says you've offered to help with Billy." "Please." Ellie knelt beside the boy's bed, taking in his pale face and the way he tried not to show his pain. "Let us help. You have enough to worry about without adding nursing to your burdens." Patrick Morrison looked up, his eyes meeting Sam's. "Sheriff, we appreciate the offer, but, well, we know what folks say about you and your wife. We can't afford to have more talk." "Mr. Morrison," Sam interrupted gently, "your boy needs help. That's all that matters right now." Young Billy spoke up then, his voice weak but determined. "Ma, I heard what happened at the saloon, how Mrs. Carter stood up to Big Jim and all the mothers. If she's brave enough to face down the whole town, reckon she's got enough grit to help me get better." Mary Morrison looked at her son, then at Ellie's earnest face, then at her husband's worried expression. "You'd really do this? Taking our boy, knowing it'll just give the gossips more ammunition?" "Mrs. Morrison," Ellie said softly, "I lost 3 babies before they drew their first breath. I couldn't save them, couldn't protect them, couldn't be the mother they needed. But maybe I can help your son. Maybe that's enough." The tears that had been threatening in Mary Morrison's eyes finally spilled over. "Bless you," she whispered. "Bless you both." 2 days later, Billy Morrison was installed in the small back room of the Carter homestead, and Ellie had thrown herself into his care with fierce determination. She prepared broths to build his strength, changed his bandages with gentle efficiency, and read to him from Sam's collection of books when the pain made sleep impossible. Sam watched his wife with growing amazement. The woman the town had labeled barren and cursed had revealed a natural gift for healing and nurturing. Billy responded to her care like a plant responds to water after drought, slowly at first, then with increasing strength and vitality. "She's got the touch, Doctor," Thompson observed during one of his visits. "Some folks are just born healers. Eleanor's one of them." But it wasn't just Billy who was being healed. Sam noticed how Ellie seemed to bloom with purpose, how the shadows that had haunted her eyes since her miscarriages began to lighten. And Billy, starved for the kind of individual attention a busy family couldn't provide, soaked up her care like desert ground soaks up rain. "Mrs. Carter," Billy said one evening as she adjusted his pillows, "why'd you marry the sheriff?" Ellie smiled, glancing out the window where Sam was chopping wood for their evening fire. "Because he saw who I really was, not who everyone else thought I should be. And because when I'm with him, I remember who I want to be. And who's that? Someone brave enough to help when help is needed. Someone who doesn't let fear make all her choices." She smoothed the quilt over his legs. Someone who understands that family isn't just about blood. Sometimes it's about choosing to care for each other. Billy was quiet for a moment. My ma says you lost some babies. Ellie's hands stilled on the quilt, but her voice remained steady. Yes, 3 little ones who never got the chance to grow up. Reckon they'd be proud of you now, taking care of me and all. The simple words, spoken with 16-year-old earnestness, hit Ellie like a physical blow. She had to step outside for a moment, where Sam found her standing in their garden, tears streaming down her face. "What is it?" he asked, immediately alert to any threat. Billy said my babies would be proud. She leaned into Sam's embrace, letting herself feel the grief she'd carried for so long. "Sam, what if this is what I was meant to do? What if losing them? What if it taught me how precious life is? How important it is to fight for every person who needs help?" Sam held her close, understanding flooding through him. "You think maybe your purpose isn't about bearing children, but about healing them. Maybe. Maybe God doesn't always work the way we expect. Maybe sometimes he breaks our hearts so we can learn to mend other people's." 2 weeks later, Billy Morrison walked out of the Carter homestead on his own 2 feet, his back straight and his eyes bright with health. His recovery had been nothing short of miraculous, and word of Eleanor's nursing skills had spread throughout Copper Springs. "Mrs. Carter," Patrick Morrison's voice was thick with emotion as his family prepared to leave. "We can't ever repay what you've done." "You already have," Ellie replied, watching Billy embrace Sam goodbye. "You trusted us with something precious. That's payment enough." As the Morrison family headed back to town, Sam and Ellie stood together in their doorway, watching the dust settle behind their departing wagon. "You know what this means," Sam said quietly. "Word's going to spread. People are going to start coming to you when their children are sick or hurt." Ellie nodded, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "I hope so. It won't be easy. Some folks will still talk, still judge. Let them talk." Ellie's voice carried a strength that hadn't been there 6 months ago. "I know who I am now, Sam. I'm not the cursed widow they made me into. I'm Eleanor Carter, and I'm exactly where I belong." That evening, as they sat on their front steps watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson, Sam took his wife's hand. "You know what I think?" "What's that?" "I think maybe we were both wrong about being broken. Maybe we were just unfinished. Maybe it took finding each other to become who we were always supposed to be." Ellie squeezed his hand, her wedding ring catching the last light of day. A healer and a protector. Partners in every sense of the word. In the distance, a coyote called to its mate, and somewhere in Copper Springs, a child would sleep peacefully, knowing that if trouble came, there were people on the hill who would answer the call. Not because they had to, but because they chose to. Because love had taught them that sometimes the greatest purpose comes from the deepest wounds. And in the growing darkness, the lights of their home shone like a beacon, a place where broken souls could find healing and lost hearts could discover they belonged after all.